Hey everyone, Tommy here. Today I'm going to show you how to dye spandex for cosplay, specifically for Spider-Man costumes, but you can totally use this process for any other cosplay you can think of that has a spandex bodysuit or anything similar. Now most of us have dealt with the white stretch fade of dye sublimation costumes. Now there are companies out there like Print Costume and Heroes Time who are starting to offer suits that are printed onto colored fabric. And while that's totally a viable option, it's not all that great if you're looking for a specific shade of color, or if you're looking to puff paint and detail a suit before it's sewn. Trust me. If you've ever had to deal with puff painting or detailing a suit that's already sewn, you know that it sucks. Now this process that I'm about to show you is surprisingly simple and easy to do, and it's really useful for dyeing unsewn dye sublimation prints. Now I wouldn't recommend using this process on a dye sublimation suit that's already sewn, unless it's all like one color, like say the Ben Reilly suit where it's all red, or even something like a comic book black suit where you'd be able to go in and add like white dragon skin or puff paint to the emblems afterwards. But if your pattern is still unsewn and separated by colors, that makes dyeing each color really easy. Now this process is even useful for something like a Raimi black suit, or even the black sections of the Far From Home suit, meaning that if you were to print those patterns onto black spandex, you really wouldn't be able to see any of the details at all. But if you were to print those patterns onto regular white spandex, it'll give you the opportunity to see and even puff paint something like the brick patterns or the detail lines on the Far From Home suit, and once you dye the puff painted fabric, it'll actually leave it behind and intact. Now I wouldn't recommend doing that unless the color of your dye is also the same color as your puff paint. The dye is strong enough to actually dye the puff paint as well. The only real exception to this rule is if your puff paint is actually black, because you can't really dye things that are black, but it will work nonetheless. Today we're going to be dyeing a McLean TASM 1 pattern. This was actually printed by Fabric on Demand. You can also go to RPC Studio if you're looking to have patterns printed onto white spandex. They're pretty comparable in terms of price, especially when you factor in the shipping cost, so take your pick. Okay, so things you're gonna need. You're of course gonna need some dye. This is dye poly. This is dye specifically made for synthetics. Do not use regular dye or any dyes not made for synthetics because they're gonna wash out the moment that they touch moisture. You can also use this brand. This is Rit Dye More. It is made for synthetics as well, and it is readily available. You can get this stuff at Walmart, Joann's, Michael's. In my experience, it's not nearly as strong as the dye poly, which is fine if you really want to preserve the colors of your dye sub print. I once used this on some blue No Way Home fabric and it seemed to work well enough, but in this case we want really saturated colors, so we're gonna go with the dye poly. It'll help to have some mid-sized plastic buckets, that way we can wash and rinse the fabric. You're gonna want some gloves, a big spoon or some tongs, and a stainless steel pot. Now this goes without saying, but do not ever use any of the cookware for cooking once you use it for dye. These are toxic chemicals and you really don't want this stuff ending up in your food. Don't be stupid. Lastly, you're going to need a stainless steel sink to wash out all the dye once you're done. Do not use a ceramic sink, otherwise you're going to risk dyeing that as well. Now this goes without saying, but please don't wear any clothes that you particularly care about when doing this. In my case, I'm wearing all black. Okay, so we have our fabric here, and the first thing that we're going to want to do is wash this out. This is going to get rid of any finishes that might be on the fabric, and it's going to make the dye adhere better. So all we got to do is just put it in the bucket, get some water, add a little bit of dish soap, and then just give it a wash. The fabric being wet will also help with the dyeing process. Now we're just going to dump this out, and now this fabric is ready to dye. All right, so the next thing that you're gonna do is you're gonna put your pot on the stove top and fill it with just enough water to where your fabric is fully submerged and can move freely. Now for spandex and polyester fabrics, the dye needs to be really hot in order to be fully absorbed into the fabric. So we're gonna turn on the burner and wait until the water is just underneath the boiling point. All right, now that looks pretty good. And we're gonna wanna keep this at a low simmer for the entire dyeing process. Next, we're gonna put on our gloves, and then we're gonna add the dye. So we're gonna open this up, and then we're gonna add the dissolvable dye packet. And then we're gonna take the color intensifier, open it up, and squeeze the whole thing in there. And then we're just gonna give this all time to dissolve.
You want some soup?
Now that everything is dissolved, we can finally add the fabric. So we're just going to take this fabric and just dump it right in. Now we're going to want to keep this moving during the entire dyeing process, so that way all the fabric is evenly coated in the dye. Now the instructions on the packaging say to leave this in anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour. In my experience with these polyester heavy fabrics, I leave this stuff in there for about an hour to 2 hours just to get the best results. Of course, nylon blended fabrics are going to dye a lot quicker than polyester, so be sure to read what the composition of your fabric is before you do this. But in our case, we're going to leave this in anywhere between an hour to 2 hours. Any longer, it's going to be more saturated. Any less, it's going to be less saturated. It also helps to have a scrap piece of fabric to dye before beforehand if you really care about what your colors are gonna look like. So if you have the time to do that, by all means. All right, all of our fabric is fully dyed now. So now all we gotta do is just dump all of this out. And then we're gonna rinse all this in warm water. And then we're gonna gradually rinse it in cold water until everything runs clear. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, this can be a pretty long process and it can take multiple washes in order to get all the excess dye out. It does help to have a sift like this. Again, don't use this for cooking. So you can put each piece of the fabric in one at a time and then just rinse it like that. So that way it gets most of the dye out just as that one piece. Either way, it should work fine. And then once all the water runs clear, we leave it out to dry. I want to thank you guys for watching and I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comment section down below. Otherwise, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you all later.